I am going to begin a video today on one of the parables of Jesus. This comes from a set of essays I wrote, as you can see here, essays on the border, and this was done, as you can see, in 2009. Among the essays, I did one on the parable of Jesus called the Sower and the Seed. What is interesting about this parable is it's one of the few parables where Jesus himself gives his interpretation of it, for the reason that his disciples, whom he worked with closer than others, did not really understand the parable, so he explains it. Plus, he also says something very important about it, that this parable is the kind of parable where if you don't know this parable, you will not know the other parables. So I am going to begin reading what I wrote in this essay on the border of what's called the sower and the seed. And this will probably be kept in my Bible folder. So we're going to begin reading now this essay that I wrote. God knows us before we were born. Perhaps God is a gardener who plants his seeds, planting them not indiscriminately as we do, but planting seeds where they need to be growing and for a purpose only he discerns. What if we were to look at our own lives that way? What difference might that make? What if we look to see into what kind of a life we have been planted? To honestly see the kind of soil our lives have fallen upon, and therefore the kind of ground on which we stand. What difference would all this make to us? Consider a parable that Jesus singled out as the parable of parables, the key to the lock on the doors of our awakening. In this parable, Jesus sees that God is a gardener indeed. We are, in fact, planted differently into life. But more, Jesus himself is also our gardener with his own seed, a seed to plant within each of us. We see that this parable is of a kind of double mystery, a parable within a parable. Not only is this a special parable, but is also one of the few where Jesus himself provides his own interpretation. Now, we know that Jesus taught differently to different people. He discriminated the levels of receptivity among the listeners and gives what they were ready to hear. He took his disciples aside and gave them secret instructions and mysteries. Some others were often given deeper glimmers of his wisdom, and then for the masses or the crowds, he spoke only in parables and let it up to them to discern the riches enfolded and packed with treasures within. With this parable, the disciples are constrained to ask him what it means. And in his response, we find its double meaning. It is a parable within a parable. This parable we speak of is known as the parable of the sower. It is found in 3 of the 4 Gospels. It begins in Matthew 13:1, in Mark 4:1, and in Luke 8:4. We are taught to large crowds from many, it was taught to large crowds from many towns where Jesus had been, and for them, and for better for them to hear, climbing into a boat and then went out a little into the water. And after he finished teaching the crowds and was able to be alone with the disciples, they asked him why he taught them in parables. Here he acknowledges that he discerns levels of being and discrimination between them in his teachings. He senses also that they were not only asking of parables in general, but that they too were not able to understand what Jesus had just taught the crowd. For he says to them in Mark, "Do you not understand this parable?" Then he asks the key question, "How then will you understand all the parables?" His questions show us that this parable is about sowing, is the key to all parables. Now, the next question is why? Why is this the key to all the parables? And why is it a parable within a parable? We will continue with this next time.